Hi everyone, I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. I am joined by Sarek. He is one of our Royals at the Ranch. You're watching Royals at the Ranch episode 11, and that is for Thursday, September 2nd, 2021. In this episode, we're going to continue with our story about Amun and Amunet, our very first two Royals at the Ranch, and we're going to look at what their first 8 weeks in their full habitat enclosures look like. We're going to have a behavior break about the types of stress, and if you watched last Sunday's Serpente Sunday, you already have a head start on all this information. And then we're going to see everyone's favorite segment, Royals in Your Homes, and that is viewer photos and videos of your Royal Pythons. All right, let's catch up with Amun and Amunet. So we moved them from their chondro tubs to actual habitat enclosures. We moved them to Vision's version of the 3x2x2 habitat, and we're going to look at what their next 8 weeks were like in those enclosures. The preferred resting and sleeping locations for both of them were the same, and I found that very interesting because they were not housed together. They're housed each in their own individual enclosure, but they were exactly alike. So during the day while they were resting and sleeping, they either spent time between the exterior of their rack tub and the enclosure wall or inside their humid hide. So if you remember, I took a baby bin, like a bin that would be in a hatchling rack, and that was big enough for their age that they were now. And I fully furnished that and made a hole in it, and I put it in the habitat enclosure. So if they did not want to be in the habitat at large, they could very easily just go in that juvenile bin and they could live in there. However, I didn't see them using it at all. And all day long, every time I checked on them for the whole 8 weeks, I would find them squished between the wall and the side of that tub or inside their humid hide. And then as far as meals went over the next 8 weeks, I did behavior-based feeding, which meant that I fed them when they were actively awake and actively hunting. And it looked like they just weren't assuming an ambush position out of habit, but they were actively doing behaviors that made me think they were trying to increase their opportunities to locate prey. I fed them mice and rats from tongs, and I never had any refusals. All right, what was their activity like for the next 8 weeks? Well, they moved around at night. I never saw them during the day except to just check on them, and I found them sleeping or resting in one of those 2 locations I already talked about. So they moved around at night, and they were active climbing and stretching out and just roaming around their habitat. And then eventually I would usually see them draped on the ledge above their door for a little while and on some of the PVC perches. And when they were actively hunting and getting in those ambush positions, they would do that above the door on branches. Well, I had one branch in there, so on the branch or on one of their perches, on their ledge or on top of their humid hide. They would actually get on top of the humid hide, but hang the front third of their body off of the humid hide and stare at the floor. And then periodically they would approach the door, and I assumed they were seeking to come out because when I would open the door, they would slowly come out and explore the room. Here's what I did not see during this time. I did not see them using that rack tub or bin at all. I didn't even see them go in there. It doesn't mean they didn't, like when they were roaming around and exploring. I just didn't see them in there. I did not see them use the black rectangular plastic hide. So that standard large hide from Reptile Basics, I never saw them use that either. I never saw them swimming or soaking in their water, and I did not see them basking. Now I have an asterisk next to that because I didn't see either of these two basking, and they had the opportunity to bask under a halogen that was right next to a UVB light bar, and I didn't see that at all. But this little guy right here, Sarek, he does bask. And also our adult Royal Python, Fulcrum, basks. In fact, Fulcrum basks more than any of our other Royal Pythons. He comes out at least once a day and basks. So I can't explain why these two didn't, but I still don't really observe them basking. And I guess I will see this next winter, now that they're 2 years old, if that behavior changes at all. Here's what I discovered during that 8 weeks. When I went to do a total enclosure clean out about halfway through their time in their habitats, I discovered that Amun was using his rack bin for shedding. I found several old sheds in there, and that Amunet was using hers as a toilet area. Amunet's rack bin was full of urates and fecal matter, and clearly she'd been using that as a bathroom because I didn't have to clean anything up in the whole rest of her enclosure. They were using the ceramic cave between their nightly roaming and when they settled to sleep for the day. So at night, after they did their roaming and their ambush positions or whatever else they were engaged in, they would get inside those ceramic caves and they would sit there until the early morning hours, and then they would move from that ceramic cave back to that location and squish themselves between the rack bin and the wall of the enclosure. I also discovered that they preferred cooler temperatures. There was no doubt they preferred cooler temperatures. Now keep in mind that this 8 weeks took place in June and July, so it was summertime here in Colorado. We do not have air conditioning, and the daytime ambient room temperature in their room was like 78 to 88 degrees Fahrenheit, and at nighttime it only got down to about 70 to 74 degrees Fahrenheit. And so during the day, both of the snakes were remaining in that spot between the bin and the wall, and it actually was the coolest spot in the enclosure. And then both snakes would emerge at night after dark, and I didn't ever see either one of them using their hot spot. I did provide a heat mat for them at night in case they needed it, and I never saw them using that either. All right, now it's time for our behavior break. And again, if you watched Serpente Sunday last week, you already have a total heads up about this subject, but it's about the types of stress. And if this interests you and you want an in-depth look at it, go back and watch Serpente Sunday from last week because it was a 30-minute mini class or little miniature course on the types of stress. So what is stress? Well, stress is the psychological perception of pressure. It may be real pressure, or it may just be that the individual perceives pressure. And it's the body's physiological response to that real or perceived pressure that we call stress. Pressure can be anything that triggers a change from baseline. So when we are comfortable and relaxed, when our snakes are comfortable, relaxed, we're all at baseline. And when anything changes us from baseline, psychologically or physiologically, that is called stress. And it's the body's attempt to cope with a change in the environment or some type of stimuli that's triggering this response. So it could be a real or perceived threat or danger. It could be anticipation or excitement. It could be any change in the norm that causes us to have an elevated perception of pressure or excitement. In other words, we're no longer at baseline. Now our body's physiology is elevated. And maybe our brain's neurochemistry has changed to deal with that stress as well. It could be an event. It's just any environmental stimuli, any occurrence whatsoever resulting in a physiological change from what our baseline is or from what our snake's baseline is. There are 3 types of stress. There is good stress. It used to be called eustress, and it still technically is called eustress, but there's more current terms that are used, and one of those is good stress. Good stress is challenging, it's exciting, but it's not distressing. The experience is beneficial and it facilitates learning and growth. And then there's tolerable stress. And tolerable stress is challenging and it is distressing, but the snake can cope with it and can recover from that stress. And that's what makes it tolerable. So the experience causes temporary distress. However, it can be beneficial because the experience is building resiliency and the snake is learning to handle adversity. All right, the last type of stress is toxic stress. And toxic stress is challenging, is distressing, and it's inescapable, and the snake cannot cope and cannot fully recover from it. Toxic stress is always bad. It can lead to increased fear, anxiety, distress, overall aggression, subjective helplessness, and poor health. That's poor mental or physical health. So toxic stress is distressing, it's challenging, but organisms can't cope with it and they don't recover from it. So here's what you should remember about those 3 types of stress. Good stress is beneficial. Tolerable stress can be beneficial. And toxic stress is always bad. It causes actual physical changes to the brain, and it has detrimental long-term repercussions that may not be reversible. All right, now could you use a little stress relief? Well, for your stress reduction viewing pleasure, we're going to see royals in your homes. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this video. All right, here's a stress review for you. You should be in a good frame of mind to think clearly after that nice relaxing video of all those beautiful royals. Remember that good stress is challenging and not distressing. Tolerable stress is challenging and distressing, but the animal can cope and recover from it. And that toxic stress is challenging, distressing, and it cannot be coped with, and most of the time the animal cannot recover, or I should say fully recover, because you may be able to get better after that toxic stress, but you're never fully the same after an event that has caused you to experience toxic stress or caused your snake to experience that. So we never want to put them in that position. All right, now here is your chance to be the behavior analyst. You are going to see a video of this very snake right here, Sarek, on one of his adventures on our snake climbing tree. And I want you to look at this video. It's going to play through twice. The first time I'll kind of narrate what's happening, and the second time I'm just going to let it play and I'm not going to say anything. And I want you to decide how you would categorize the stress that Sarek is experiencing in this video. So he's been climbing on the climbing tree. It's that modified bird perch that many of you have seen in other videos. And he wanted over on this shelf around these other enclosures and bins. Many of our snakes do this. They move from that tree over to this area. He falls. I was there standing by in case something happened. I wasn't going to let anything bad happen, but I try to let the animals build resiliency. And then I just move him back over to where he started. So this is exactly where he started his adventure. And I put him back there. And this video is going to play through again. And I'm not going to say anything this time because I really want you to watch the video, watch his body language, because you have to decide how you would categorize the stress taking place in this video. Okay, so what type of stress did Sarek experience during that climb. I want you to think about the criteria that we talked about for each stress category, and I want you to put your answer with the explanation in the comments of this video. That's your homework. In next week's episode, we're going to catch up with Amun and Amunet again. Are you tired of hearing about them yet? I'm going to go over the next 13 months that they were here. So we're going to skip forward from where we left them off to 13 months ahead. I'm going to go over my conclusions based on just these two individuals. I'm also going to go over how royals compare to other pythons. And we're going to have a training talk that continues from the last training talk where we talked about what the first step in target training was. And then, of course, we'll have our Royals in Your Homes segment. I want to thank everyone for watching. I really appreciate your interest in animal training and behavior, especially in regards to snakes. Please remember to always be kind and love your animals. And Sarek and I will see you next Thursday for another episode of Royals at the Ranch, the series where we discuss the behavior, temperament, and trainability of Python Regis.